Hello there, this is the Midday International News Desk on ECWA Television Africa. If you come on about top stories here at this hour. Numerous killed, almost 2 million affected as China's Changji deluged. About 15 people have been reported killed and 3 others are missing after unending and heavy rainfall caused flooding in northern China's Shanxi province, one of the country's top coal-producing areas, according to the state media. On Tuesday, the state-run Global Times reported that at least 1.75 million people have been affected by the floods and about 120,000 were displaced after 19,500 houses collapsed. It wasn't stated in the report which area in Shanxi has been the most affected. The province is located west of Beijing and covers some 156,000 square kilometers, that's 60,000 square miles. The initial direct economy loss is estimated at least $770 million, the report said. The flooding occurred just months after record floods hit the country's central Henan province in July, killing more than 300 people and raises concerns about guaranteeing the supply of energy ahead of the winter. Many parts of Shanxi is landlocked province with a dry weather, saw exceptional rainfall over the past week, according to the provincial government, which ordered coal mines to take flood-proofing measures and make emergency plans to be activated immediately in case of grave danger. According to a local government statement, at least 60 coal mines in the province have postponed operations due to the floods, even as the country faces a power supply crunch. Beijing recently ordered coal mines to increase production and ensure supply at all costs, saying it will allow higher electricity prices in a bid to boost generation. On health issues, COVID reaction, a United Kingdom's vilest ever public health failures. A critical parliamentary report has found that the United Kingdom government's initial response to COVID-19 and the delay in imposing a lockdown early last year was one of the most important public health failures in the country's history and cost thousands of lives. The cross-party group of UK legislators also observed that the government failed to develop an effective test and trace system which could have helped control the spread of the virus and followed a strategy of what efficiently amounted to herd immunity. As published in a report, the United Kingdom, along with many other countries in Europe and North America, made a serious initial error in taking this risky approach and not considering a more emphatic and rigorous approach to stopping the spread of the virus as adopted by many East and Southeast Asian countries. The review was based on hours of testimony from more than 50 witnesses, including advisors on government policy, health, and science. More than 138,000 people have died from the coronavirus in the United Kingdom, one of the world's highest death tolls. The legislators said while the country's top emergency decision-making body met for the first time after COVID-19 on January 4, 2020, a lockdown was not imposed until March 23rd of that year. The gradual and incremental approach to non-pharmaceutical interventions cost lives. They wrote, decisions on lockdowns and social distancing during the early weeks of the pandemic and the advice that led to them rank as one of the most important public health failures the United Kingdom has ever experienced. Professor Neil Ferguson, who was part of the Government Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, SAGE, told the Science and Technology Committee that if the national lockdown had been imposed even a week earlier than it was, we will have reduced the final death toll by at least a half. Former Health Minister Matt Hancock and Dominic Cummings, a former advisor to Prime Minister Boris Johnson, were also among those who gave evidence to the committees. The report also criticized the government's decision to take back elderly patients to care homes without testing them for coronavirus, a move which led to a surge of cases among the most susceptible people in the population, as well as decision-making in relation to ethnic minorities and people with disabilities. It noted some areas where the United Kingdom had done well, citing its vaccine program and treatment development research. The report said a significant part of the success of the Oxford/AstraZeneca vaccine was due to the government's early investment in research and development, which originally started with the UK vaccines network set up in 2016. That investment and support through successive governments has clearly paid off. It also noted that more than 42,000 volunteers worldwide had been recruited for random trials of COVID-19 treatments under the recovery trial. Establishing the effectiveness of dexamethasone and the ineffectiveness of hydrochloroquine were vital contributions to the worldwide battle against COVID-19 and estimated to have saved over 1 million lives globally, the report said. The report also said ahead of an independent public inquiry into the government's handling of the coronavirus pandemic, with Johnson has said will begin next year. In Japan, Japan faces increasing disparity after 8 years of Abenomics. After 8 years of economic impact under Abenomics, a nickname for the economic policies set out for Japan in 2012 when Prime Minister Shinzo Abe came into power for the second time. Japan's stock market has increased and expensive cars are selling fast in Tokyo, but that new wealth is concentrated in a small slice of society rather than broadly distributed, according to data. For new Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, addressing that divide has become a high priority. He promised to tackle income disparity worsened by the pandemic, but he has offered few hints as to how he will do so. Masanori Aoki, 62, who owns a small coffee shop in the working-class district of northeast Tokyo, said it's like everyone has become poor. Kimi Kaboshai says her wages have not risen for 4 years where she works, and many who work in the industry are resigned to the fact that salaries rarely increase. The government collects tax, but that money isn't used to help people who really are in need, she added. North Korea's Kim says the United States and South Korea threaten peace with arms build-up. Kim Jong-un, North Korean leader, has said his country's development of weapons is essential in the face of hostile policies from the United States and a military build-up in South Korea that is destabilizing the peninsula, according to reports. Kim said in a speech that Pyongyang was only growing its military in self-defense and not to start a war at the Defense Development Exhibition, according to a report on Tuesday. He was quoted as saying, "The United States has been frequently signaling that it's not hostile to our country, but there has been no behavioral ground to believe that it is not so. For our descendants, we need to be strong. We need to first be strong. The military threat our country is facing is different from what we saw 10, 5 or 3 years ago," he said, adding that tensions on the Korean peninsula will not be easily resolved due to the United States. Yang Uk, an expert in military strategic studies at Hannam University in Seoul, said according to a report that Kim's message on alleged U.S. hostility was nothing if not constant. The Hwasong-16 is North Korea's largest ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile, and was unveiled at a military parade in October 2020, but not yet test-fired. "We are not discussing war with anyone, but rather to prevent war itself and to literally increase war deterrence for the protection of national sovereignty," he added. The two Koreas have been in a fast-tracking arms race, with both sides testing increasingly advanced short-range ballistic missiles and other hardware. On business, the International Monetary Fund (IMF) supports Georgieva after World Bank data rigging crime. The International Monetary Fund's (IMF) Executive Board has expressed its full confidence in Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva after reviewing accusations that she stressed World Bank staff in her former job to change data to favor China. United States Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen puts Georgieva on notice that she will carefully monitor the IMF's follow-up and evaluate any new findings and call for dynamic steps to strengthen data veracity and credibility at the IMF. The IMF's 24-member board at the U.S. Department of the Treasury issued different long statements on Monday after a week of lengthy meetings over Georgieva's actions as World Bank CEO that threw into question her continued leadership of the IMF. Georgieva, a Bulgarian economist and the first person from a developing country to head the fund, had heatedly denied the claims. She welcomed the board's endorsement in a separate statement of her own and said she was pleased its members had approved the allegations against her were groundless. This has obviously been a difficult episode for me personally, she said. However, I want to express my unyielding support for the independence and integrity of institutions such as the World Bank and IMF, and my respect for all those committed to protecting the values on which these organizations are founded. Georgieva had won the support of France and other European governments earlier, but the United States and Japanese officials have advocated for a more in-depth review of the accusations, according to sources briefed on the matter. An issue was a damning report prepared by the law firm Wilmer Hill for the World Bank's board about data irregularities in the bank's non-council doing business reports. The firm's reports alleged that Georgieva and other senior officials applied undue pressure on bank staff to make changes to boost China's ranking in the business review, just as the bank was seeking Beijing's support for a significant capital increase. Still on economy, Myanmar experiences currency fall crisis as economy deteriorates. Myanmar is fighting a drop in local currency amid an unusual dollar shortage, rising up the cost of imports and worsening the economy's struggle with double challenges of the pandemic and post-coup financial isolation. Analysts said since the military seized power in February, the kyat has tumbled about 50%, that triggered a freeze on parts of Myanmar's foreign reserves held in the United States and deferral of multilateral aid, both key sources of foreign currency supplies. Restrictions on cash withdrawals have increased worries about the safety of money in banks, motivating people to seek more widely used currencies such as the US and Singaporean dollars or Thai bahts. The Central Bank of Myanmar's efforts to repress the rush for dollars, including stepping up foreign currency supplies and ordering exports to repatriate earnings within 30 days, have failed to stem the kyat slide. The currency may plunge further to 2,400 to a US dollar by the end of this year and 3,200 by end of 2022, according to Jason Yeg, Senior Asia Country Risk Analyst at Fitch Solutions. The currency sell-off is the latest crisis to hit the country that's still grappling with street protesters following the ouster of the civilian-led government by Aung San Suu Kyi, nationwide COVID restrictions and a civil disobedience movement by Suu Kyi's followers have hit normal economic activities, shrinking exports of everything from textiles to agriculture, commodities, another source of foreign exchange. It is really hard to predict when this financial crisis will end, said Kim Win, a public policy analyst focusing on economic governance in Myanmar. Only the restoration of democracy and a legitimate government will unlock the international assistance Myanmar needs to address this crisis, but it's really hard to see that happening. The plunging currency is already taking its toll on Myanmar's economy, with some businesses shutting down as they are unable to cope with rising cost of imports and raw materials. Though the central bank doesn't divulge its foreign reserve levels, the recent slide in kyat suggests that it has likely fallen to a precariously low level after trying to prop up the currency for months, Yek said. The currency volatility is expected to ease soon due to recent steps taken by the authorities and higher export earnings in November and December, Win Thao, a deputy governor at the Central Bank of Myanmar, said on Monday. Myanmar's reserves dwindled after the U.S. froze $1 billion held in the New York Federal Reserve days after the coup, while the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, IMF, suspended funding for projects. To preserve the foreign currencies onshore, authorities last month suspended imports of passenger cars and amended the forex law last week. But putting more controls will further undermine investor confidence in Myanmar, and exporters will find ways to keep hard currency offshore, said Vicky Bowman, director of Myanmar Center for Responsible Business. In Iraq, the Prime Minister declares ISIS finance chief captured by Iraqi forces. In Baghdad, Iraqi's Prime Minister said Iraqi forces captured Sami Jassim, the deputy of former ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi did not disclose facts of the operation. However, in a statement posted on Twitter, he said that Jassim was detained outside of Iraq. He did not disclose the place or date of Jassim's arrest. Al-Kadhimi said, while our Iraqi security forces focus on securing the elections, their Iraqi National Intelligence Service colleagues were conducting a complex external operation to capture Sami Jassim, who was in charge of Daesh finance and a deputy of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. According to Iraqi security expert Fadel Abu Ragif, Jassim, also known as Abu Asya, served as the financial supervisor of the terrorist group under al-Baghdadi since 2015. He lived in Mosul in 2012 until he met Baghdadi the same year, Abu Ragif said in a report. In 2015, the United States Treasury Department labeled Jassim as a specially designated global terrorist, a designation that places financial sanctions on terrorists and those who provide support to terrorists or acts of terrorism. In 2016, the Kurdistan Region Security Council, KRSC, reported that Jassim and an aide had been killed in a joint operation with U.S. Special Forces. However, in 2019, the U.S. State Department's Rewards for Justice program placed a $5 million bounty on Jassim, also known as Sami Jassim Mohammed al-Jabbour, and two other senior ISIS leaders, demonstrating that American authorities believe was still alive. The State Department said Mohammed al-Jabbouri has been instrumental in managing finances for ISIS terrorist operations. Baghdadi became the leader of Islamic State of Iraq, ISI, in 2010. In 2013, ISI declared its absorption of an al-Qaeda-backed militant group in Syria, and Baghdadi said that this group will now be known as Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, ISIL, or ISIS. Later that year, Baghdadi's followers first swept into Raqqa, that began their ambitions in Syria and led in June 2014 to the establishing of what they call an Islamic Caliphate. They had rules, an army, and briefly a currency, yet just over 3 years later were reduced to fighting for crabs of Mosul in Iraq and the object of a large offensive against their de facto capital in Raqqa. ISIS control of Mosul officially crumbled in July 2017 when then Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi declared that troops had recaptured the metropolis. Baghdadi was killed by U.S. forces during a raid in Syria in 2019. Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces had provided early intelligence that was very helpful, U.S. Central Command General Frank McKenzie said after the operation. Now in Africa, Somalia and Kenya anticipate decision on border clash. The United Nations top court resolves today on a long-running border clash between Somalia and Kenya. The court's decision will possibly have far-reaching consequences for bilateral bonds and access to natural resources in the oil and gas-rich region. The case was brought in by Somalia more than 7 years ago. At the core of the dispute lies the cause that the joint maritime boundary should follow from the points where the land frontiers meet on the coast. Kenya has already accused the United Nations Court of bias and announced that it will not recognize the court's binding verdict. This dispute covers an area of 100,000 square kilometers believed to be rich in oil and gas deposits. The panel of 15 judges is led by U.S. Judge Joan Donogo. Nairobi has already granted exploration permits to Italian energy giant ENI, but Somalia opposes the move. And that's you up to date with the news stories at this hour. Stay away from those people who try to disparage your ambitions. Small minds will always do that, but great minds will give you a feeling that you can become great too. Have a blessed day.